There are a variety of different types of operations and transformation processes at their heart. And in order to look at them and define them, we give them all process characteristics. Base the process characteristics along four different distinctive spectrums. The four spectrums we look at are the volume of their output. Is this mass production or is it specialist one-off production and all the different parts of the spectrum in between? The variety of the output. Do we just produce things that are all the same endlessly, or do we produce one-offs for each, something that's carefully designed for each different customer? And of course, there are great varieties and different ways of doing this. That's the way. What is the variation in demand for output? Is it constant? Do people want the same amount of it all the time? For instance, with petrol, there's roughly a general ongoing demand, or is it very seasonal? Is it only certain types of the year that people want this particular product? And what is the visibility the customer has in the production of the product or service? Is the visibility much lower than this customer, or is it much higher? Can people actually see what's going on doing this? So these are the four basic distinctive ways we look at outputs. On the volume dimension, of course, simply put, high volume means high repeatability. It means people can specialize in different aspects of the production. People can become experts in that area. People benefit from moving along the learning curve, where the more they do something, the more they get, the better they get at it, the more efficient they get at it. And in some ways, this means the systemization of work. You become trained. You become in a kind of tailorist approach. We can do the same thing over and over again. It becomes automatic. It becomes second nature. People stop sometimes even thinking about it. And of course, this efficiency, this moving down the learning curve, tends to give much lower costs for items that are on the high volume dimension, and much more expensive individual costs for items that are of low volume. The variety dimension. How different is the different products and services offered? Does everybody get the same? The idea that it's actually not true, that everybody, you could have afford to any colour you want as long as it was black. That actually isn't true. Black was one of the few colours you couldn't get. But the reality is this idea that you can produce either lots of things that are differentiated and it becomes more expensive, or you can produce services that are highly tailored. If you go into McDonald's, service is not highly tailored, that they do allow you to make some choice. You go into other products where things or services, for instance, in some of the financial banking, people banking at my level may get a bog standard service, but if you end up working for, say, Goldman Sachs and working very rich people in a very high wealth, high net worth banking, you'll find they're very much tailored luxury services. This variety, of course, the greater the variety you produce of goods and services, the greater the cost. If you're doing things in different manners, if you have to use different materials, you have to use different training, then of course, and you have to change setups of machinery, this costs time and money. This sort of operation must be very flexible. There's no point in having a production line that is set up to do the same thing over and over if you're actually allowing people to have specialist design input into their own, say, kitchen or their own car, which some of the high-end goods do. Let's talk about kitchen house in one of the previous videos. And this, of course, means that actually you must be able to adapt to these very quickly. You must have systems that are set up to be taken down, quickly reset and put back up again, so as to waste as little time as possible. But it is bound to be more expensive than if you can be that, because standardization minimizes cost. Standardization brings down costs. So the more that you can standardize, the more you can do things the same, the lower the prices you will be able to, the lower the prices you will have to pay for these goods, and the lower the cost that you'll have to pay. You also have the variation dimension. How much does demand for goods and services change depending on the external environment? Are these the goods that are required all year round? For instance, we all maybe use petrol all year round, but we probably use less energy for heating in the summer. There may well be demand for warm clothes in winter and bikinis in summer. These are things that change over time. And this, of course, has a big effect on how we can produce and how we can plan. This means that we have to have different resources. We like to have a factory working all the time, but actually, is it best to keep it working all the time and stockpile? Especially if it's goods that might be of clothing, for instance, which may have trends as well as seasonal factors. We spend our summer producing winter goods because we've got spare capacity, and then we discover it gets to the winter, actually demand is different that winter, styles have changed, somebody famous has worn something different to which they wore the year before, and people are doing that. Because it could also be that actually, if we have a mild winter, demand for warm coats falls. If we have a cold winter, demand for warm coats increases. So they're big changes that we can't possibly measure, but we can try and forecast them. So we try and plan effectively ahead. This is where operations meet strategy, and in fact operations can be said to drive strategy. So we look at ways we can forecast the future, and as we could know, it's very difficult to forecast weather. Even 10 days in advance is very difficult to forecast weather, but we can forecast climate. So we know it will be colder, we just don't know how much colder it will be. And as I said before, this demand increases cost. It means that if you have to store things, there's a price involved. If you have to store things, cost involved. That cost can be cash for actually having to hire a warehouse, but it can also be loss. Things get pilfered, things get damaged, things that wear out. Things might get spoiled. So there is a great higher variety, higher variation in demand, the greater the costs involved. And the visibility demand dimension. Visibility means how much can you see of the process hidden from you, or is the process public? It may well be you cannot see what's happening inside the factory, but there may be other reports and other elements that tell you what is going on inside the factory. Customers in a high visibility operation can actually see what's happening, for instance in restaurants where the kitchens are open, and in this case it's very important that people who deal with the customers can speak to them, can clearly understand them, have a good contact skill. The university is an example of a high visibility operation. You can pretty much see the end product immediately as we produce it. You are sat in the classrooms looking at us, or you're dealing with members of staff who you can go up and talk to them in their offices, or you're dealing with professional support service staff who you can meet inside their things that have open desks, etc. And it's very important for all these things that we keep them working efficiently, that everyone understands that the customer has to be dealt with fairly, because it's not always right, the customer always has a valid point of view, and they must also be polite, accept regardless of what's happening, try and deal with them in an effective manner. So these things can be very difficult for people to work on, and it can mean that people who are normally not want to be interested in particularly dealing with customers need to be trained in it. This is yet a further expense to businesses. The higher visibility, the more expensive it is in maintaining a good customer interaction.